Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the MBL Blitz podcast, number 7, actually, on January 7th, 2017. I'm your host, Spencer Murray. We are currently midway through Season 21 in the MBL, and we have a lot to cover, and it'll start right after this on the No Huddle. Thank you all for tuning in, and the No Huddle starts right now. The Kansas City Chiefs are 5-2 and on a 4-win streak after an easy start. Word out of the league is that the Chiefs just beat the Steelers in a very close game, 38-35 in overtime. Trey McIntyre with a huge game, 447 yards and a touchdown with 1 interception. They're going to be tested here on this after this bye week on the stretch. They've got 5 straight division games. All these games are always close. We're going to see what this team is made of and see if they're real or not. Atlanta Falcons are currently faltering. Who takes the NFC South? The Bucs are currently in the lead. It's anyone's game. The Saints have a great quarterback in Young Dronit. The Falcons still have a chance to come back. You know, they've only got 5 or 6 losses. It's anyone's game. We're going to see what the NFC South is all about. Gabe Williamson seems to be the early favorite for the Rookie of the Year, but can he keep up his current pace? The Titans are playing some great teams coming up. Very tough teams on this backstretch. We're going to have to keep an eye on this guy and see if he can make that final push and win the award. Last but not least, is Paxton Lynch's time with the Denver Broncos coming to an end? After his poor showing on MBL Live and poor games this season, you'd have to think something's got to be done soon. I'll talk more about that right now. It seems like the AFC West has had a handful of quarterbacks recently that like to throw to the other team. Last year we had Trey McIntyre with 30+, Paxton Lynch with his struggles, Derek Carr, hashtag Carr overrated. 3 borderline average quarterbacks trying to push into the elite status that are having a hard time throwing to their team. Well, usually when I mention this topic, we talk about Derek Carr. I'm going to lean over to another player that needs to be pinpointed. Paxton Lynch, having a rough season. Current stat line as of week 7, he's 84 for 155. It's sitting at about a 54% completion percentage. Touchdowns to interceptions, 6 touchdowns, 20 interceptions. He's looking at, roughly about a 1 touchdown to 3 interception per game. Last MBL Live, horrid showing, poor guy. 10 for 24, 41.7% completion percentage, 1 touchdown, and 4 interceptions. Now, speaking of 4 interceptions, I did some more stat digging. He's had 4 games with at least 4 interceptions. He has yet to break that 4 interception mark, but he's had 4 games of 4 interceptions. That's 16 interceptions. He's only had 1 game with a QBR of over 100. He's struggled quite a bit this season. He's taken a definite dip from last season. Seems to be having a harder time. Maybe the playbook is too hard for him to comprehend. He's throwing erratic throws, overthrowing. Maybe he's misreading the routes. No one knows. The run game is borderline non-existent. CJ Anderson has up and down games. It's very inconsistent. The defense can't play both sides of the ball. The defense is the only thing keeping the Broncos in the hunt for a wild card spot at this moment. The defense has the talent to get it done. Maybe give Paxton Lynch more options to throw to, keep him in 5 wide sets, let him get rid of the ball quicker, not holding on to the ball, taking sacks, throwing deep. He's got a tendency to force the throws downfield into double coverage, triple coverage, as you can see on MBL Live, and it's going to end up looking bad for him in the long run. He's going to lose his job. He's going to end up being cut from the team. The Broncos are going to have to find something quick in order to make something happen. This is way too talented of a team in a very tough AFC West division. So leave it up to the owners there and the coaching staff to figure this out here in the backstretch of the season, and we'll see what they can do. Is this your first time watching MBL content? Well, if so, make sure to hit that subscribe button right below this video. Also, if you have a Twitter, follow us at Bomber League and at MBL Network. You will not be disappointed from the daily content that is pouring out of this channel. Make sure to stay tuned.
Now, moving on to my next topic, as you can see here, there's no rush. I'm going to touch on some of the worst rushing attacks that we have in the MBL right now. These are players currently averaging under 3 yards per attempt with a minimum of 30 carries. So starting off here, we have Gage Burke out of Miami. He's only averaging 1.6 yards per carry. Miami's having a tough time, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. But just looking at this guy's worst game here, 6 carries for 1 yard, and that was at home against Green Bay. Miami's got a lot to figure out, and like I said, I'll touch more on that later. So I'm going to move on down here to the Detroit Lions with Jeremy Hill and Amir Abdullah. Jeremy Hill, big free agent signing this past offseason for Detroit, and you can see he's struggling to grasp anything in that offense. 2 yards per carry, one of his worst games this season, 20 carries for 8 yards at Seattle. Now, Seattle is definitely a tough defense to play, but, you're a big guy. You're a big name. You got to find a way to make plays. Jeremy Hill is benched after week 3. Amir Abdullah comes in as a starter week 4. He's right on the borderline of 3 yards per carry. He's at 2.9 average for the season. Worst game that I could find, 14 carries for 33 yards and a fumble against the Jets. That was a huge upset for the Jets there. Detroit really doesn't have to rely on their rushing attack with their elite passing attack, but it would be nice for a team like that to have a great rushing attack to be able to balance it out, alleviate some pressure off of Stafford. Now, before I move on to Eddie Lacy and Jarrell Presley, we had a reporter catch up with Eddie Lacy in the locker room, and this is what he had to say about their frustrations in their running game.
Honestly, I don't know. I'm just responsible for being where I know I'm supposed to be. I don't know, I have to do what I have to do.
It just didn't seem like you guys could get in a rhythm. Do you think it's because you weren't able to establish a run game early?
That may be what it is. That's what film works for. We're going to figure it out tomorrow when we go watch film. So, whatever the problem is, that's what we're going to work on fixing.
Is it just a matter of there's a season's worth of game tape on you now? People are knowing how to play you better defensively?
I mean, that could be it, but no matter where it is, it's my job. I'm still supposed to be able to run the ball and, make sure if it's, not everyone's going to be 10 yards, but just make sure we get something positive.
Lacy himself only averaging 2.3 yards per carry, as well as his teammate Jarrell Presley with 2.3 yards per carry. There's something going on offensively with this team now. The Green Bay Packers are 5-2, still in the race for the NFC North, but this run game is going to be necessary to combat against these high-powered offenses. They're going to need to run the ball, chew up some clock, work the ground. Eddie Lacy's worst game this season so far, 12 carries for 8 yards at Washington. He was then benched. Jarrell Presley comes in week 4 as a starter. He's had some rocky games. Worst game I found, 13 carries for 10 yards there at home against Buffalo. Like I said before, these two teams really don't have to worry about rushing attacks, but there's some teams out there like Miami who are completely, bare offensively. And then now we go to the last one on the list, Dion Lewis out of Philadelphia. They brought in Jerick McKinnon. He's serving his purpose. He's making the big runs, but Dion Lewis getting the bulk of the carries. They're having a hard time finding any holes. 2.8 yards per carry. He had a game with 7 carries for -1 yard. That was at home against Washington. Now, Washington seems to be a very, very great team at playing the run, but Philly's in a tough NFC East. You got to find a way to run the ball and keep these high-powered offenses off the field. So there's some players that are on the borderline of dipping underneath the 3 yards per carry. Like the graphic says here, I only did it on a minimum of 30 attempts. So I'm going to keep an eye on these guys like I always do with most of my stories and see how it all turns out here in the next few weeks. Maybe have an update about it in the No Huddle in the next episode. But you guys want to make sure you keep an eye on these guys, see what Miami does. Like I said, I'll get into that later. But a lot of these guys, 4 players are on 2 great teams that need to find a rushing identity quick in order to have that complete 100% offense and be able to dominate.
Speaking of rushing attacks, I'm going to move on to one of the 2 undefeated teams we're going to touch on, the Cincinnati Bengals, currently 6-0 at the top of the power rankings of the AFC. They are currently 13th in total offensive yards and 17th in total yards allowed on defense. This team is here, it's playing. They lost a lot of big names, and a lot of these smaller names coming in have stepped up and made plays. Christine Michael, 98 carries for 394 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's not a Jeremy Hill, as you can see, who's struggling in Detroit, as I mentioned before, but he's getting the job done in Cincinnati, allowing Dalton to have that ability for play-action passes and someone to rely on so Dalton's not constantly slinging the ball. Their red zone efficiency is one of the highest in the NBL at a 94%, and their defense is performing greatly. Defensive line eating 18 sacks total on the season. The only red flag is Giovanni Bernard, another big name, usually with Cincinnati, has only seen 5 carries this year. So maybe Michael is the man in Cincinnati, and Bernard is slowly going to be phased out for maybe a rookie or a possible free agent pickup this offseason. We'll have to see. Moving on to the next undefeated team, the LA Rams, currently 8th in offensive yards total, 20th in defensive yards allowed. Speaking of their defense, they have a plus 13 turnover differential, making plays on defense, winning games. A big part of their offense this year, Tavon Austin finally living up to his hype. 24 catches for 560 yards and 5 touchdowns. Making big names. As you can see, he had the cover of MBL magazine not too far ago. Only big red flag for me with this team, Todd Gurley going down with an injury. Not much running back depth to produce there. They signed Sarkandrick West, who also struggled in Kansas City and looks to be struggling here in LA. We're going to have to keep an eye on that, but that's the only hiccup I can see in them slowing down and possibly slipping up for a loss in their run to undefeated season. Small note on the side, both of these teams are 2 of the top 10 teams in the least penalized. They have the least penalties. I believe the Bengals are around the 3rd and the Rams are like the 7th or 8th least penalized team. So these teams are very disciplined going into each game, knowing exactly what they're going to do, running their game plan to a T and winning games. We have to keep an eye on these teams and see if they can make that mystical run of 16-0 into the playoffs.
Make sure you're locked into the MBL Network tonight at 8 p.m. We have an MBL Live matchup of the Dolphins and the Jets. AFC matchup. Miami looking for that one win. Make sure to stay tuned. It's going to be nice. Great guys on the call. Always great to have a lot of viewers in the chat and interacting with everyone. So be sure to be there. 8 p.m. Eastern, MBL Live, Dolphins and Jets. Now I'm going to move on to my next topic. I'm going to hit on some huge free agent signings like I always do, usually on every episode. Some big name signings happening this season. I'm going to start off with Marcus Mariota, 5 years, $70.1 million. This man was not fazed by Tyrod Taylor coming in. He's been playing lights out. Had some rough games. Recently, the last game had a huge turnover. He's there. He's got the talent. He's ready to go. He just needs to shake those nerves off. Tennessee is still a huge contender in the AFC South. Their defense is a little rocky, but their offense is definitely showing great potential with that new addition of Gabe Williamson, and we're just going to have to keep an eye on him. Jameis Winston also signed to a huge deal, 4 years, $74.1 million. He won a lot of money. He didn't want to stay in Tampa Bay that long. And I can understand that. Tampa Bay is still unproven. They still have yet to make the playoffs. And he's wanting to, I guess he's giving them one more chance until the tail end of his career, that peak moment, late 20s, early 30s, jump onto a Super Bowl contender, be able to play for a championship. So I don't blame him. A huge signing, Amari Cooper, 7 years, a big chunk of money there, and $84 million. It's crazy. Clearly he's the star player in Oakland on the offensive side, and that 10-game suspension has not fazed him in staying in Oakland, competing in the AFC West. Another huge name in Oakland that was also re-signed, Khalil Mack, 5-year deal worth almost $85 million. That man staying there. He's ready to wreak havoc on these AFC West offensive lines. He's had some great seasons and some great big games in the last couple of seasons. Smart move by Oakland. Keep your star young player, keep your defense young, and make sure he's the focal point of that front four. These are some really big names re-signed. Definitely franchise players for these teams. Now moving on, I'm going to touch on a couple players. One currently in negotiations, a big name player in Green Bay, Randall Cobb, recently rejected a 4-year, $41 million deal. They're working their hardest to get a deal done on the table. I haven't heard any confirmation yet personally, so we're going to keep an eye on that. Definitely a huge part of Green Bay in the NFC North, part of that high-powered offense with Aaron Rodgers, Jordy Nelson getting older. Devontae Adams will have to step up and play a role, which will probably make Randall Cobb the number one unless they are drafting a wide receiver in the coming seasons. Now, a huge name that has rejected any deal so far and is probably testing free agency is David Johnson out of Arizona. A huge key player for that team. They just got their young quarterback. They're looking to keep their young core fresh. And David Johnson says, no, I give up. These seasons haven't been that great. I'm just going to go ahead and move on and see if I can find a Super Bowl contender. Looking at his stats, as you can see, season 20, 192 for 775 yards and 12 touchdowns. And this current season, he's at 64 carries for 293 yards and 6 touchdowns. About on pace to match what his last season output was, maybe a little under, maybe a little over, depending on some big games or some horrible games coming up this season. But this is huge news. I mean, Arizona, they've lost Fitz last season. They let him walk. They got their QB. Their wide receivers are young. They lost John Brown. And, they're replacing these players, and if a big-name halfback like David Johnson decides to leave and they don't franchise tag him, then that's another big hole to fill in this tough NFC West. So we're going to keep an eye on that as usual and see how it all pans out towards the end of the season. I'm hoping they franchise tag him and try to work out another deal next year. So, Arizona, if you're listening, get the deal done. Tag him. Don't worry about it. This is a guy you cannot let walk.
The last story I'm going to touch on today is the Miami Dolphins. I really didn't want to bring a lot of coverage to this team, but I really believe that there's a win or two in this team this season. They play their games close, and it's just an offensive struggle. Their defense is playing lights out, and we're going to get into that later on in this segment. Looking at the Dolphins right now, they're the first MBL team to finish a season 0-16, which was last season. They are averaging only 7 points per game on offense. Currently 0-6, bottom of the AFC East. Looking into their possible struggles, Tannehill, he had a decent-ish year last season, and this year he seemed to struggle out of the gate. Ownership made a call to the coaching staff, pulled Tannehill. They brought in Brandon Doty. He started week 5, played a not bad game. 89 QBR, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Played a smart game. I think he was like 20 for 29. No touchdowns, not a lot of yards, but he managed the game, and they almost came out with a win against Buffalo. Now, after the bye, they brought in Trevon Boykin, a little bit of an eyebrow raiser. They just had a decent game with a quarterback, and they bring in another one, and they start Boykin in Week 7 against the Kansas City Chiefs. Boykin proceeds to throw 7 interceptions and gets sacked 7 times. 33 QBR. Had a horrible game. Struggled a lot. Forced some throws. There were some tip passes that receivers didn't try and grab or try to fight out of the defender's hands. He caught some bad breaks, but end all, 7 interceptions is not good for a quarterback to come in off the street and put up. Their defense on the other side, though, they're 11th in points allowed, and they're the second best overall defense in yards allowed per game. I believe it's like 215 yards allowed per game on average. They need a QB bad. They missed out on one in the offseason during the draft. They drafted a corner with their first pick. In my opinion, that wasn't a smart move. There were some great quarterbacks available, as you can see, that are putting up numbers in their respective teams this year. Maybe they were waiting on a stud quarterback like a Trey McIntyre or Andrew Luck type, ready to come and play right out of college, pro ready, and maybe they were just hoping that they miraculously get a high pick again, which is pretty much looking guaranteed, and they end up with a great quarterback. So another part of their issue is their running game. As I mentioned before, Gage Burke, 1.6 yards per carry. They need something else at running back. They were given the rookie chances, and it wasn't working out. It's not working out. They need to change it up. We're just going to have to see how it all works out. I believe they can get a win, maybe 3 wins. Put a win under their belt. They don't want to have 2 0-16 seasons in a row. That would look horrible on the ownership. That would look horrible for the coaching staff, and things would definitely have to be changed after that. So keep an eye out on this team. AFC East is always tough battles with these teams, and I believe Miami can get at least 3 wins this season. Bank on it, and we'll just leave it at that.
All right, everyone, that is all I have for this episode of the MBL Blitz podcast. I thank you for listening. I thank you for your feedback. If you haven't completed the survey that I posted, I'm going to throw it in the chat. Anyone's welcome to fill it out. It just helps me figure out what you guys like, what you guys don't like, what interests you more, what you would like to see. I really enjoy doing this, and I'm nearing the 10th episode, someone mentioned to me. So in just, about 6 weeks, I'll be at episode 10. That's a pretty big milestone for a podcast like this. So again, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being supportive. Be on the lookout for the Commissioner's Corner podcast coming up here next weekend. They just had a great live show. It went off without a hitch. Great interaction with the chat. They're looking forward to stepping up that show even more. So stay tuned for that. Also, again, NBL Live tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, Dolphins, Jets. Miami looking for that 1 win, possibly 1 out of 3 that I'm hoping for. So stay tuned. Keep an eye out for that. Again, thanks for watching, and see you guys next time.